The letter arrived on a rainy Wednesday. Sylvia Kane stared at the thick envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she slid her thumb under the seal. It was from the board at the university, the culmination of 5 years of work. Her dissertation on the linguistic shifts of early American literature, a groundbreaking analysis that had consumed her nights and left her apartment littered with drafts and half-empty coffee cups. She opened it, unfolding the pages with trembling fingers. But her heart sank as she read, the university was awarding the prize to someone else, to Matthew Blake. Her breath caught in her throat. Blake, the colleague she had trusted, the one she had shared her notes with, the one she had invited into her cramped office for late-night discussions and peer reviews. She sat down hard, the letter crumpling in her lap. The betrayal unfolded quickly after that. Blake's name appeared in journals, conferences, cited as the sole mind behind theories she had spent years refining. He presented papers that bore her signature concepts, twisting them into his own, rewriting history with smooth confidence. Photographs of him shaking hands with deans and dignitaries circulated on the university's website. His name was on books, interviews, accolades, and hers was nowhere. When she confronted him, when she gathered the courage to step into his office, to face the man who had hollowed out her work, he didn't even look surprised. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile curling his lips. "You should have been faster," he said, his voice low and casual. "Academia is not about who's right. It's about who gets there first." Her throat tightened, words dying before they could form. Blake's hand reached out, tapping the edge of his desk, where a copy of the prize-winning paper sat, her work twisted and contorted, his name emblazoned across the front. She felt her nails dig into her palms. "Move on," he said quietly. "No one cares about the quiet ones." The days that followed were a blur of rejection letters and cold silences. The university offered no recourse. They praised Blake's achievements, suggesting Sylvia focus on new avenues. Her colleagues turned away, too cautious to challenge the rising star. Students stopped visiting her office, emails went unanswered, her lectures were reassigned. She packed up her things in silence, her once bustling office reduced to a few cardboard boxes. Books she had loved, notes she had scribbled in the margins, half-finished drafts of papers that would now never see the light of day. She left through the back entrance of the building, the rain soaking her thin coat, her steps, slow and heavy. By the end of the semester, her name had vanished from the university's directory. The world moved on. Blake's fame grew. He was invited to speak at conferences overseas, his books translated into multiple languages. Academic journals quoted him as the foremost authority on early American literature. His face, once plain and forgettable, became a fixture in academic circles. Sylvia watched from the shadows, her bitterness hardening into something sharper, something cold and calculated. She changed her name. She erased her digital footprint, deleted her old email accounts, burned papers with her name scribbled in the corners. She moved to another city, smaller, quieter, where no one knew her face. There she started small, editing papers for cash, offering anonymous consultations on student theses. She kept her head down, listening, learning, waiting. 2 years passed. Then an opportunity emerged. A position opened at a small but respected publishing house, specializing in academic works. It was Blake's new publisher, the one handling his latest collection of essays, the ones built on stolen theories, twisted into his narrative. Sylvia applied under her new identity, careful to craft a resume that seemed unremarkable but competent. The hiring manager, tired and distracted, barely glanced at her papers before offering her the position as a junior editor. Her first day at the publishing house felt like stepping into enemy territory. The walls were lined with books bearing Blake's name, the staff murmured about his upcoming release, how it was going to redefine the field. Sylvia kept her expression neutral, her eyes calm as she was handed a stack of manuscripts to review. Among them was Blake's newest work, a sweeping treatise on the linguistic evolution of American narrative forms. It was laced with theories she recognized immediately, phrases lifted directly from her notes, concepts warped into something that fit his voice. But now she had access. She could see the bones of his fraud, She began to work quietly, methodically. Each day she would review his chapters, marking supposed errors, suggesting clarifications, subtly altering key arguments. She twisted the text in small but significant ways so the final manuscript diverged from the original ideas. She inserted fabricated references, misattributed quotes, contradictions so subtle that only a close reader would notice. No one at the publishing house questioned her changes. She was efficient, precise, and polite. They trusted her to handle the work. Blake himself sent brief, arrogant emails, approving edits without a second glance. His ego, once his weapon, became his undoing. Sylvia's revisions made it to print. The book was published, hailed as a triumph. Reviews praised its depth, its nuance, its insight. But careful readers, scholars who knew the field intimately, began to notice inconsistencies. References that didn't exist, theories that contradicted established facts, logical flaws that couldn't be ignored. Within months, the academic world began to murmur. Articles appeared questioning the authenticity of Blake's work. His reputation, once unassailable, began to crack. Sylvia watched from her quiet corner of the office, her lips curling into a thin, satisfied smile. The first crack was barely noticeable. A quiet footnote in an academic journal, a brief observation by a peer reviewer who noticed something strange in Blake's citations. It wasn't much, just a hint that some of the references didn't add up, that certain sources couldn't be traced. Blake dismissed it with a smirk, calling it a minor oversight in an interview. The publishing house issued a bland statement, promising to review the concerns. But Sylvia knew it was the beginning. From her desk at the publishing house, she quietly added fuel to the fire. She drafted anonymous letters to other scholars, hinting at deeper inconsistencies. She leaked excerpts of Blake's falsified work to online forums frequented by academics, highlighting the contradictions she had carefully inserted. She tipped off a respected investigative journalist who had a reputation for digging into academic fraud. Each day, Blake's name lost a little more of its luster. Conferences grew cold, invitations rescinded without explanation, reviews turned sour. Scholars who had once flocked to his lectures now hesitated to cite his work. His public statements became defensive, sharp-edged, his arrogance cracking under the weight of mounting doubt. The journalist, Cole Whitman, published an explosive exposé. He outlined how Blake's recent work was riddled with inconsistencies, how citations led to dead ends, how key theories contradicted themselves. He hinted at deeper fraud, suggesting that Blake's earlier works might also be tainted. Blake's world began to collapse. He stormed into the publishing house one afternoon, his face flushed, voice raised, demanding explanations. The staff murmured nervously, eyes darting away as he shouted in the conference room. Sylvia sat quietly at her desk, sorting through manuscripts, her face calm as ice. When the editor-in-chief called her into his office, she knew what was coming. "Blake's furious," he said, rubbing his temples. "He says the errors are the result of sloppy editing. He's threatening to sue us if we don't fix it immediately. He wants a full retraction, a public apology." Sylvia let her expression tighten, her voice low and even. "I followed standard procedure. Every edit was approved by him. I have emails with his confirmation." The editor sighed. "We'll need those. He's going to come after us hard." Sylvia provided the emails, the ones where Blake had arrogantly approved her changes without a second glance. They were precise, time-stamped, and irrefutable. The editor read them, his face paling. "Well," he said quietly, "this isn't on us then." Blake's accusations died on the vine. The publishing house distanced itself, issuing a carefully worded statement absolving themselves of responsibility, emphasizing the author's final approval of the text. But it wasn't enough to stop the storm. Blake's reputation shattered. University committees convened to reassess his credentials. His honorary degrees were quietly revoked. His speaking engagements were canceled, his invitations rescinded. Former colleagues who had once praised him now spoke in hushed tones about irregularities and plagiarism. His name, once synonymous with academic brilliance, became a cautionary tale. Sylvia watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. She attended industry events under her new name, watching from the edges as whispers circulated, as people wondered aloud how it had all fallen apart. She never spoke of the past. She let them believe she was just an editor, a quiet professional with a sharp eye for detail. But behind closed doors, she continued her work. Blake's earlier books were still in circulation, still cited in papers, still occupying shelves in libraries. Sylvia knew that the only way to fully erase his false legacy was to expose the rot at the foundation. She requested reprints under the guise of updating editions. She volunteered to review the original manuscripts, subtly inserting corrections that contradicted Blake's claims. She rewrote key passages, replacing stolen ideas with falsified versions that collapsed under scrutiny. She made it so the books would not just be questioned, they would be discredited. Months turned into a year. Blake's finances crumbled. Lawsuits drained his accounts. The university, under public pressure, stripped him of his tenure. He was left in a small apartment, isolated, his calls unanswered. His name vanished from course syllabi. And then came the final blow. Sylvia compiled everything: emails, manuscripts, audio recordings, financial records, proof of her original work, and the trail of her edits that led to his collapse. She handed it all to Cole Whitman, who published a comprehensive expose detailing the full extent of Blake's fraud. How he had built his career on stolen work, how he had approved false edits without understanding them, how he had collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. The story went viral. Major newspapers picked it up. Academic institutions issued formal apologies for their part in propping up his false reputation. Blake's books were pulled from shelves. His name was scrubbed from conference programs. He became a ghost. Sylvia, standing at the edges of it all, finally let herself breathe. Blake's apartment sat at the end of a crumbling street, tucked between abandoned buildings and boarded-up storefronts. He hadn't left it in weeks. Once he had driven a sleek black car and worn tailored suits, his face smooth and confident under the lights of lecture halls and conference rooms. Now he sat in threadbare clothes, the stubble on his face thick and uneven, his hands trembling as he scrolled through his shattered reputation online. Every article cut deeper. Scholars, journalists, former students, one by one they condemned him. His books were discredited, his lectures dismissed as fraudulent. Even his closest allies had turned their backs. His email was a wasteland of rejection and ridicule. He hurled his phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. The noise echoed through the empty space, but no one came to check. No one cared. He opened his laptop, logging into a private folder, a last refuge of his stolen notes and plagiarized drafts. His hands trembled as he searched for something, anything, to salvage. But the files were a mess. Pages corrupted, names wrong, theories crumbling under their own contradictions. He realized, with a sick twist of his gut, that Sylvia had gotten to them all. The subtle changes she'd inserted over the years, references that led nowhere, logic that collapsed upon itself, had infected everything he'd ever published. Panic clawed at his throat. He scribbled frantic notes, tried to rebuild arguments from memory. But it was no use. His own ignorance trapped him. He had spent so long coasting on stolen work that he didn't remember how to craft a coherent theory himself. The knock at the door startled him. His pulse spiked, and for a moment he froze. Then he rose, crossing the room in silence. He opened the door cautiously. A woman stood there, dressed simply in a long gray coat, her hair pulled back, her face pale and unreadable. For a long moment he stared at her, his mind struggling to place her. Then his breath caught. "Sylvia?" he rasped, his voice cracking. She said nothing, just met his gaze with an unwavering calm. Then she stepped inside without waiting for permission, her shoes clicking softly against the worn floor. "I thought you were gone," he said, backing away, his voice shaking. "I thought you disappeared." "I did," she said quietly, her tone even. "But you never stopped looking over your shoulder, did you?" He tried to muster anger, to throw accusations, but his voice faltered under her gaze. "You took everything from me," she said. her words slow and deliberate. My work, my career, my name. But you didn't understand the damage you left behind, how deep it cut, how long I waited. His hands trembled. I didn't mean to. Don't lie, she said softly, her voice slicing through the air. You knew exactly what you were doing. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of years pressing between them. Then she turned, scanning the room, her gaze settling on the stacks of papers, the broken phone, the shattered remnants of his stolen empire. I came to see what was left, she said, almost to herself, to see how far you'd fallen. He sank onto the threadbare couch, his head in his hands. What do you want from me? He whispered. Nothing, she said simply. I already have what I wanted. The truth is out. Your name is mud. Your legacy is ashes. His breath hitched, a broken, pathetic sound. She watched him for a long moment, then turned to leave. But just before she reached the door, she looked back. There's one last thing, though. He lifted his head, his face pale and desperate. You'll spend the rest of your life trying to claw your way back, she said, her voice low, almost gentle. But you won't, because every path you try will crumble under the weight of the lies you built. And when you look in the mirror, you'll see not a scholar, not a genius, but a fraud. Then she walked out, leaving the door open behind her. Outside, the rain was falling, cold and steady. Sylvia pulled her coat tighter around her and walked down the cracked sidewalk. Her pulse was steady now, her breath calm. The years of waiting, of watching, of weaving her revenge into every corner of Blake's life, it had finally come to its conclusion. But she wasn't done yet. There were still traces of his false work, scattered across journals, archives, online databases. She would erase them all. Slowly, methodically, she would purge his influence, rewriting every line, correcting every falsehood, until nothing remained of him but a cautionary tale, whispered in quiet corners of academia. Months passed, and the world moved on. The story of Matthew Blake's fall from grace faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, fresher faces. But within the academic community, his name lingered like a bad smell. Universities issued formal statements. Conferences quietly retracted his keynote slots. Students were warned against citing his work. His books were pulled from shelves. Errata notices appended to old journal articles. Sylvia worked quietly through it all. At the publishing house, she continued to edit, blending into the background like a shadow, her new name unremarkable, her work meticulous. But her real focus lay beyond the office walls. In her small apartment, where the curtains remained drawn and the walls were lined with printouts and notes, she devoted her nights to a single purpose: erasing every trace of Matthew Blake's fraud. She logged into online archives, flagged suspicious citations, submitted corrections to editorial boards. She reached out to quiet, careful allies, academics who had whispered their suspicions over the years, librarians who had noticed discrepancies, graduate students who had once idolized Blake and now felt betrayed. Together, they formed a loose network, dedicated to cleansing the field of his contamination. Sylvia combed through every paper Blake had published, dissecting them line by line, unearthing her original theories twisted under his name. She composed formal rebuttals, submitted papers under pseudonyms, rewrote the narrative in conference panels and discussion forums. Slowly, Blake's influence rotted from within, his reputation dissolving not just into scandal, but into academic obscurity. His name became a warning, a hollow echo. One evening, as autumn winds rattled the window panes, Sylvia sat back in her chair, her fingers trembling from hours of typing. The final article had been uploaded, the last correction filed. The list of Blake's retracted works was complete. She stared at the screen, her vision blurring with exhaustion. The work was done. She stood, stretching her stiff limbs, and crossed to the window. Outside, the city was cloaked in rain, the streetlights casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, Blake was still alive. But it didn't matter anymore. He was nothing now, an empty shell, a man with no name, no legacy. She closed her eyes and let out a slow, steady breath. The next morning, she walked into the publishing house and handed in her resignation. The editor-in-chief blinked in surprise, but she simply offered a polite smile, a quiet thank you, and left. She had no intention of staying. Her purpose here was finished. She booked a ticket to a coastal town far away, a place where no one would know her name, where the salt air could scrub away the last traces of her old life. She packed lightly. A few clothes, a single suitcase, a battered notebook. She left behind the apartment, the walls covered in printouts and notes, the ghosts of her revenge. When she arrived in the small town, she rented a modest room overlooking the sea. The air was sharp with salt and wind, the cries of gulls echoing over the waves. She found work at the local library, sorting books and helping visitors, her days filled with quiet, simple tasks. No one here knew her history. No one whispered her name. She was just a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a precise manner. And it was enough. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold over the water, Sylvia sat on a weathered bench overlooking the beach. The waves rolled in steady and patient, the sand cool beneath her feet. For the first time in years, her thoughts were still. The weight of stolen work, the sting of betrayal, the long, slow burn of revenge, all of it had been left behind. She thought of her parents, long gone, of the professors who had doubted her, the students who had once admired her, the colleagues who had turned away, of Matthew Blake sitting alone in some forgotten apartment, his hands trembling over worthless papers, his name spoken only in scorn. And she smiled. Not a cruel smile, not bitter, but quiet, content. She had reclaimed her work, dismantled his lies, and erased his shadow from the world. Not with anger, not with violence, but with precision, patience, and the quiet, relentless force of truth. She had become the editor of not just his downfall, but her own story. The sun dipped below the horizon, the sky deepening to indigo. She stood, brushing sand from her hands, and walked back toward the lights of the town. She would live simply now, her days filled with books and quiet conversations, her nights with the sound of the sea. The past was done. The truth was written. And she, the forgotten scholar, was finally free.